Well, good morning and welcome to a very different type of assembly. I thought I would take you on a historical tour of the castle, show you some of the rooms that perhaps you haven't seen before, and certainly rooms that you don't use, and also give you a little bit of a shortened version of the history of the castle and the building that you go to school in. So to start with, there is a reference to Hatherop village in the Domesday Book, and the book was written, as you know, in 1086 when William the Conqueror wanted to know more about the land that he had recently won during that recent battle of the Hastings in 1066. And so he decided to send teams of trusted men around the whole country to do a survey of every town and village. And at the time there were two small villages which were called manors in the 11th century, and they were called Hatherop. And although the castle wasn't mentioned in the Domesday Book, it could be assumed that the building at the time served as the centre of Hatherop. After about 100 years, Hatherop was turned into a monastery, and this is where monks used to live and pray for 6 hours a day. The rest of the time they spent in silence, and the monastery would have been where the castle stands today. In 1530, when Henry VIII had a quarrel with the Pope, that's the Roman Catholic leader, he decided to destroy all the monasteries and sold off all the land. Now the story is that Henry VIII used the buildings of the castle behind me as a hunting lodge for his second wife Anne Boleyn until she was beheaded. So once Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn died, Henry VIII sold all the land, and it was taken over or inherited by a William Blomer, who built a new house on the same land, and some of which of that original building is part of our current building now, and that is particularly the tower, which you can see up there. And we're going to go up to the tower now. So here we are going up the tower steps, and usually that door is shut and access is not able to come up here, but I thought it would be worthwhile showing you what is deemed to be the oldest part of the castle. Now this is the room that we do use. This is the dressing up room, and as you can see, full of costumes and props that we use for plays. And into another room here. Now this room is completely out of bounds because it's in such an awful state of repair. As you can see, the ceiling isn't brilliant and it certainly needs an awful lot of work. But this room here was some sort of lounge, I would guess. That lovely fireplace and the mirror above it, and this is the second floor of the tower. Very much, but this winding staircase takes you right up to the top. Now again, we can't really go outside right on the top onto the roof, but we'll just sneak our way out here. And we are now right at the top of the tower, and you can see in the distance there, that is Colne. And as I turn the camera around, down there you can see the orangery, and if I move the camera around even more, you can see across towards the Astro. And on the far side, that's William Strip. And I'm going to pan round here and back to Colne. If I go all the way around, you can see how far we can see from the top of this tower. And there's the tennis courts and the playing fields, and then we go round and you can just about see St Nicholas's Church there. And it's a beautiful view from up here, and on a beautiful day like this. So I'm going to wind my way back down the stairs, and we'll be back down on the ground floor. The Blomer family lived in the house for some years and then passed the house on to their great granddaughter, who married a gentleman called Sir John Webb. And over the next 300 years, various members of the Webb family lived at Hatherop. And they were devout Roman Catholics, and Catholicism at that time was really frowned upon, and Catholics were treated incredibly badly throughout this period. And this didn't deter the Webbs from following their faith, and they were a very wealthy family, and they were able to absorb a lot of the fines and absorb the punishments that went with being Catholic at the time, mainly through bribing local magistrates and so on. But the Hatherop became the centre of Catholicism for the area, and the Webbs even employed their own priest, which was an incredibly dangerous thing to do because the priests were hunted down and punished and put into prison, etc. And the Webbs protected their priest by building 2 tunnels that went from the castle out towards the village and across the road to William Strip. And we have the start of one of those tunnels at the school still, and I'm going to turn my camera around, and as we go through this little blue door, which is just by the archway, we'll be able to go in. So we're going to go down through into this cupboard with this outhouse, and as you can see, it's used for storing lots of things, but we think this is where the tunnel started, down here. And we go down these steps here and into the back room. Now I'm having to use a torch here to try and light up the back, but it's at this point here where we think the tunnel would have started. And as you can see with my torch, it's all bricked up, but there is a semicircular shape which is all bricked, and we think beyond that is the tunnel. And you can see that through here someone has tried to see what is through the other side, but the wall is quite thick, and it's quite possible that this was the start of both tunnels and they divided somewhere down, further down, and one would have gone over towards Hatherop and the other will have gone perhaps in the other direction towards William Strip. The story on now, about 200 years past, to about the early 1800s, and that's about just over 200 years ago. The de Morley family were in residence at the castle, and I brought you here. I'm just going to go behind the sun, there we go, to the de Morley gate, as you can see, and I'm not sure you can see that inscribed very well, but at the top there are the initials of the de Morley family, to be precise, William de Morley, and they built this as the entrance to their swimming pool. And obviously beyond the fence is the Italian garden, and we're not sure if what was the swimming pool at Hatherop, whether that was the original site for the swimming pool for the de Morley family. It possibly was. So we move on to about the mid-1850s now, and the castle was redesigned and rebuilt by an architect called Henry Clutton. And during the 1950s, a lady came and visited the castle, and she, in her memoirs, talked about the magnificent yews that lined the path, or lined the vegetable garden. And these yews here, as you know, line the yew tree walk. That's what gives it its name. And so these trees will have been planted well before 1850. And she refers to them as the finest rows of yews she has ever seen. The de Morley family lived at Hatherop till about the 1860s, and it was at this time when the house was sold to the Maharaja Duleep Singh. Now, Duleep Singh wasn't a very popular figure at Hatherop and was known locally as the Black Prince. He didn't really fit in with any of the other locals, residents that lived at Hatherop at the time, and was not a very popular figure. He lived at Hatherop for about 4 years before moving on, and it was during this short period of time where the rumours that an elephant was buried in the grounds somewhere. Where, we still don't know, but that's the time of the period of history when we think that happened. The house was then put up on the market and took a while to sell, but during this period the then Prince of Wales, who went on to be Edward VII, came round to have a look at the estate with the view to purchasing it as one of his country abodes. and he chose Sandringham. He bought Sandringham instead over Hatherop, mainly because it's reported that the hunting at Sandringham was that much better. So we've come round to the back of the castle because this was the main part of the building that was redesigned by Henry Clutton during the 1950s. And the biggest feature that he built was the octagonal kitchen, which you can see in the picture now. And this is still one of the few octagonal kitchens that was built in the 1850s that is still in use today. And so the back of the building was the area that was changed and redesigned an awful lot, and the front with its rooms very much stayed as it was. So after the house was empty for a while, the Basley family in 1867 bought the property, and what I'm going to do now is take you down through the ground floor to explain to you how the rooms that we use today were used then. And although the layout is very similar, obviously the rooms that we used them for, or what we used the rooms for, was very different to what they were used for in a private house. So we're going to go through into the school now. So here we are going through the loggia, which was called the garden entrance in 1860s, through into this area here with the staircase, and round into what we know as the offices and my study. But in 1860 this was the library, and it was a completely open room. So the wall that you can see there with the doors didn't exist, and over here the wall that goes into the library, or our library now, also had a doorway just behind that cabinet there. So we come down through the hallway here, and we're going to go into the front hall, which was known as the entrance hall then. And this was very much the front door of the house at the time, with its magnificent chimney carving here. And this was noted in the lady who wrote her memoirs that talked about the Yew Tree Walk. This was also mentioned as being a standout feature of the house. So we're going to the Dr. Moorhead room, and this was known as the drawing room, and this is where the family would have come and relaxed during the day, and after supper the ladies will have come while the gentlemen go up to the smoking room, and they would have come in here. It's right next door to what was the dining room. So into the room that you know is the music room, but this was the dining room, and it all links to the kitchens on the other side of the castle. The door that you can see in the picture, that leads to the music practice room, and this room, Mr. Page's office door, were both used as the serving room, where the food would have been brought from the kitchen into there, and then the butler would have brought it in to serve the family, and he would have used these wooden shelves here and on this side here to put the food when he wasn't serving it. So the family would have enjoyed lots of lovely suppers and dinners here with guests in this room with that wonderful view over the back lawn. We go into our dining room, what we know as the dining room, but the Basley family will have known it as the billiard room, and with its beautiful oak panelled walls and that beautiful fireplace at the end. This is where a billiard table would have been, and they would have had recreational games in here. The corridor here, this is very much through these doors here. This now is into servants' quarters, so this is where the servants would have kept all their rooms, and where all the food and the cleaning staff and the housekeeping staff would have spent most of their time when they weren't cleaning in the main parts of the castle. Now this room here, which obviously is the girls' toilets now, this was known as the pantry, and we're going to go through in to the girls' toilets because I want to show you this room. Now this big white door is normally closed and shut, but this was called the strong room, and inside the strong room it's completely fireproof and waterproof and theft proof, was where all the family would have kept their valuables, their silver and anything that of value to them in this room here. We now use it as the archive room where we keep all our old papers and records, and you can see that on the shelving unit here there is still the felt used to protect those valuable items. So across the corridor is the boys' toilets, and the boys' toilets was the butler's room during the 1860s. And one of the original features that still remains in the toilets is the gun cabinet, and you can see that it's opened up here. It's usually shut, and in here was kept all the ammunition. In these drawers here was where the ammunition for the cartridges and so on for the shotguns would have been kept, and the guns would have been kept in here for shooting. I expect it was also used for valuables as well, because as you can see it's an incredibly thick steel door that keeps it shut, and you can even see that one of the labels there refers to the trustees of Mrs. Basley. Down this corridor here, which will be familiar to all of you, and still in the servants' end of the house, this room here was so this is Mrs. Houghton Brown's classroom. This was used as the housekeeper's room, so where all the housekeepers would would come and congregate and spend some time when they weren't working, and it was in here. And then next door, which is the staff room, was known as the still room, and the still room was where all the preserves and food that was dry foods would have been kept, which would have fed the kitchen. You know, this door leads down to the archway, and across the archway there's a room on the left hand side in the as you lead up to the church. That was known as the washroom, and as this would have been the tradesman entrance, so where all the deliveries and where the servants would have entered the building would have been through this door. And then this door leads into the kitchens and the housemaid's sitting room and so forth. And in here we had the scullery, which I'll take you around the other way, and into the octagonal kitchen, which you saw from the outside. This was restored a few years ago, but very much would have been like this without all of the mod cons that we enjoy in the kitchen now. And then this room here would have been the scullery where all the washing up was done. And then down through here, this is where it all links up. We've got the pantry, which is this room here. This is where we still keep the food, and the cold meat larders would have been here. We've now got refrigerators in here, but obviously they wouldn't have had those in those days. And through to the cook's room, through here, and then through this door. This would have all been opened up. We come out into the corridor here, and the rooms down here on the left, which is Mr. Oakton, Mr. Bond and Mrs. Lazenby's study office. That would have been a private room. And then this leads down to what you know as the music practice room here, but this was the serving room. And the wall that you can see behind those filing cabinets, that wouldn't have existed then. That would have gone through into Mr. Page's room, and this is where the food was kept to take into the dining room, which I showed you earlier. So we're going into the maths classroom now, and the reason I brought you up here is because this was the smoking room, where the gentlemen would have come, and after supper generally what happens is the ladies and the gentlemen would have separated. The ladies go to the drawing room, and the men and the gentlemen come up here to play cards and to smoke cigars and so forth, and that was done in this room. The rooms on this part of the castle would have been used as the main bedrooms for the family, and would have gone through to the main residence through the locker room into what is now my flat. But you can see that we've still got some of the names of the rooms. The yellow room, going down through this corridor, and the north room here, and through here we've got this is where the children would have been, in the north nursery, and the chances are there were servants and nannies and so forth would live through that door where the Gap students now live. And then we're right up onto the top corridor here where the boarders are and a few classrooms, and this would have been where all the servants and the butler and the housekeeper will have had their accommodation right up on the top floor, all the way along here and through. So here we are down at the stable yard, and this is where the horses and the coaches were kept. And in the information that in my research, there were probably about 9 or 10 horses down here with 3 coaches, and this is where the horses were kept. And so the coaches would come out, go up the drive, pick up the family to go off to wherever they were going, to Fairford or to go out for a day out. And some original features of the stable yard still exist. And so up here you can see that piece of wood that's coming out of the building. That was probably the old remnants of a pulley where they used to pull the hay up and down to the hay lofts, and as I say, all the horses and so forth were kept in here. So here we are back at the front of the school, having done a whistle-stop tour of the history. But just to complete the picture, after Juleep Singh left Hatherop, a family called the Basley family moved in, and Sir Thomas Basley was a very well-known figure in the area, and he lived here for many years until he decided to retire down to Torquay, where he left the house and the estate to his only son, who was married to a lady called Ruth, and here they had 5 children. And sadly the son died, so Sir Thomas Basley's son died, leaving Ruth and the 5 children to live at the castle. And she was a very resourceful lady, and during the First World War she turned Hatherop into accommodation for wounded soldiers, so they could convalesce in lovely surroundings and a lovely environment. And their time here was fondly remembered, and Ruth was very much a heroine to them, who gave up a lot of her time to look after them during the First World War. Once the First World War ended, and in the 1920s, Ruth Basley remarried and decided to set up Hatherop as a place for education for her children, but also children of local families. And this is how Hatherop started its existence as a school, and this was in the 1920s. Now, the next part of the period of history I'm going to do in another assembly about how Hatherop moved from the 1920s to where we are stood today in 2020. So that next 100 years will be done in another assembly. But I hope you've enjoyed what we've talked about this morning and what I've shown you, and you've seen some glimpses of the castle that perhaps you haven't seen before. But do look out for my next assembly, which will be the celebration assembly on Wednesday, when I will be going through the values champions, and I will also be going through the house winner, which house won the House Cup from last term. So make sure you look out for that on Teams on Wednesday morning. But have a good week, and I hope your home learning goes well and you enjoy the activities that have been set, but you also look after your well-being. You get away from your screen and you get some exercise and you get outside, and hopefully the weather is as beautiful as it is now, and you can go on some walks and get into your gardens and enjoy some downtime as well as getting some work done. So for now, I will see you on Wednesday.